And now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Canada.
Mr. President and fellow delegates, we meet again in this resumed emergency special session for one reason and one reason only, and that is because the Russian Federation continues to violate international law, and specifically Articles 1 and 2 of the UN Charter. Through its illegal actions in Ukraine, Russia is showing us that it is not a partner interested in peace or justice in Ukraine or elsewhere. Once again, as it has in recent months, it falls upon us, the members of the General Assembly, to defend the Charter and everything that the United Nations stands for. The draft resolution before us is tabled in response to Russia's attempts to illegally and forcibly annex more of Ukraine's territory. The resolution reaffirms the principle that borders and boundaries cannot be changed without consent that is freely given. It reaffirms the principle that might does not make right. And we call upon every member of this Assembly to vote in favor of the resolution. Canada unequivocally condemns the so-called referenda by the Russian Federation in the illegally occupied regions of Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhzhia in Ukraine. These are yet another blatant violation of international law by the Russian Federation. Millions have been either killed or wounded or forcibly displaced by this war of Russian aggression. The latest barrage of missile attacks against civilian infrastructure in Kyiv and cities that Russia now claims as its own through its sham referenda reveal to all of us to see. It's apparent, it's there, the true nature of this war. This is not a special military operation. It is a war to punish and ultimately to destroy Ukraine. We all know, everyone in our heart of hearts knows, every country knows, that an election that is held at the barrel of a gun can be neither free nor fair. We know that. We know that when someone points a gun at your head and tells you you must vote, we know it's not free and we know it's not fair. Yet President Putin has claimed that these so-called referenda reflect what he calls the will of the people in these illegally occupied territories, that they were somehow miraculously in 2 days after being called, 2 days after being called, that they're being carried out in line with democratic standards. He's alleged that they are somehow consistent with the UN Charter, as if the UN Charter means nothing. The reality is that nothing could be further from the truth than what the President has said. This is illegal invasion. It is illegal occupation. It is illegal annexation, all at gunpoint, not democracy. Les actions de la Fédération de Russie.
The Russian Federation's actions clearly violate the United Nations Charter and customary principles of international law. According to these, no acquisition of territory by the threat or the use of force can be recognized as legitimate. These fundamental principles, to which we all adhere, and the sovereign equality of all states and the settlement of disputes by peaceful means and the abstention from the use or the threat of the use of force, have never been so threatened as they are today. Here in the corridors of the United Nations, we often speak about precedent. We must not allow another tyrannical precedent, the invasion and annexation, overcome our respect for the primacy of law. We cannot allow the Security Council, to which we have given the primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security, to be fully paralyzed by one permanent member that clearly and publicly aspires to subjugating another state. We are convinced that the majority of countries represented in the Assembly, not just the Western countries or Eastern countries, these are the countries coming from all over the world. And this afternoon we will see how far it is countries from the whole world that are rejecting the policy declared by President Putin. This last attempt by President Putin to seize land in the Ukraine is at a scale that has never been seen since the Second World War. The annexed territory, illegally annexed by the Russian Federation, extends for more than 109,000 square kilometers. This is larger than the territory of 3 Canadian provinces, and we are a geographical giant. It's larger than more than half of the UN member states have within their internationally recognized borders. And it's about the same size as those of the 3 Baltic states, which were illegally annexed by Stalin in 1940. We must remember this because following the occupation of the 3 Baltic states by the Soviet army, the participation in the elections of new constitutive assemblies reached these crazy levels of 99.6% in 1940, following the invasion and annexation by the government of Stalin. Now, this figure, 89%, this ironically and strangely resembles the outcome of the so-called referenda, which have been held in the illegally occupied regions of the Ukraine, which Russia has attempted to annex. Mr. President, the imperial habits last a long time, and President Putin is trying to bring back the imperial past to Russia by invading and occupying and annexing and subjugating. If these gestures do not convince us, his words are very clear. We should read them, because President Putin speaks publicly of his determination to reconstruct the Russian Empire through any means possible and to absorb the citizens of free and independent and sovereign states of the former Soviet Union, whether they like it or not. However, President Putin and the representatives of the Russian Federation in this hall have the audacity to say that they are operating in line with the United Nations Charter and international law. They say that this is an anti-colonial project. No, Mr. President, absolutely not. On the contrary, the reality and the truth are clear. This aggressive war by Russia goes against the principles that lie at the heart of the United Nations Charter. If we read the words of the Charter itself, they're there. I have them here. Article 2. I will read it in English.
The organization is based on the principle of the sovereign equality of all its members. All members, in order to ensure to all of them the rights and benefits resulting from membership, shall fill in good faith the obligations assumed by them in accordance with the present Charter. All members shall settle their international disputes by peaceful means in such a manner that international peace and security and justice are not endangered. President Putin would have us believe that there is some kind of conspiracy against the Russian Federation. This concept was recycled late this morning by the representative of another country. that somehow something called the West is seeking to violate Russia's sovereignty and territorial integrity. The West didn't create the charter. The Soviet Union signed the charter. China signed the charter. It wasn't created by the West. It was created by the member states at that time. And we need to understand that there is no grand conspiracy against Russia. The international community is not anti-Russian. Russia is facing the consequences of its own actions. That is to say, launching an illegal and disastrous further invasion of Ukraine on the basis of President Putin's desire for an empire that is long since gone. And as I said in French, apparently imperial habits die a very hard death. As Russia makes claim of Russophobia, sort of like the kid who kills his parents and then goes to the court and says, "Help me out, I'm an orphan." There is no Russophobia. Its own soldiers, its own artillery, its own tanks, its own warplanes, its own missiles are flattening Russian-speaking cities and towns and abusing Russian-speaking populations in eastern Ukraine. No country is seeking to violate Russia's sovereignty or its territorial integrity. The International Court of Justice said there was no evidence to support that allegation by the Russian Federation. Instead, it is Russia that has twice violated Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity since 2014. Russia has similarly violated the sovereignty and the territorial integrity of both Georgia and Moldova. Russia says, oh, we're speaking the language of sovereignty and political independence and territorial integrity, and it claims that it's a friend of the Charter. The reality is today, there is no greater threat to the purposes and the principles of the UN Charter than Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine and its annexation that has taken place in the last few days. No one is bent on Russia's destruction. The Ukrainian people are valiantly defending themselves to secure their freedom and their survival from Russia's war of aggression. Together with many of our allies and partners, we in Canada are taking what we believe are proportional and necessary steps in response, including supporting Ukraine with the means to defend itself from Russia's aggression and to reclaim its territory. It can be argued and shown that Article 51 of the Charter, in fact, anticipates a situation just like this, because it says very explicitly, nothing in the present Charter shall impair the inherent right of individual or collective self-defense if an armed attack occurs against a member of the United Nations, until the Security Council has taken measures necessary to maintain international peace and security. We do not seek Russia's destruction. What we seek is for the Russian Federation to live up to its commitments under the UN Charter and under international law, to behave as a responsible member of the international community like Ukraine, like so many other members of this assembly, to act as a steward of the Charter and a steward of the peace of the world, as was clearly anticipated in creating the status of permanent members whose mission in life it would be to preserve territorial integrity and to preserve global security. It's exactly the opposite of what Russia is now doing. The Russian Federation has the power to end this war. It has the power to end the untold misery that it has caused. The impacts have been felt most severely in Ukraine and by the many Ukrainians who have died, by the mindless, systematic destruction of infrastructure and the necessary means of life. But we also have to remember, and every delegate here knows this, the inequality of the world has historically been our greatest challenge, as well as the security of the world. Then came COVID. then is climate change always with us? But now comes this aggression, which has had a devastating impact, not simply on the people and the economy and the society of Ukraine, but is having a devastating impact on the economies of each and every country that is represented here at the United Nations. Secretary General has said we're facing a winter of discontent. The International Monetary Fund reported yesterday that we're heading for an unprecedented global recession. Think how much better it would be if instead of debating this motion, which we simply have to debate because the Security Council is not capable of doing its job because Russia has a veto, think how much better it would be if we were debating in this chamber, how can we rebuild and how can we remake the economies and societies that have been so devastated by the impact of the cascading crises that we've been facing over the last decade. Instead of which, we're being forced to go back to square one and say, let's call it what it is. An illegal aggression, an illegal annexation, and that if Russia would refrain from any further unlawful threat or use of force, and to completely and unconditionally withdraw its military forces from the territory of Ukraine that it has illegally occupied, we would see an end to this terrible, terrible tragedy, and we could start to rebuild. Not just rebuild Ukraine, but rebuild the economies of the world, including Russia. We have twice now demanded this as an assembly. We are doing it now for the third time, in response to the sham referenda and the desperate attempts to prolong what can only be described as a truly senseless, cruel, and brutal war of aggression. The Charter calls on us all to unite our strength, as it puts it, to maintain international peace and international security. Mr. President, I want to suggest that we must, all of us, rise to this call today to defend the Charter. And with it, yes, Ukraine's sovereignty, territorial integrity, and political independence. But in fact, not just the sovereignty of Ukraine, the sovereignty of each and every member state here. Not just the territorial integrity of Ukraine, but the territorial integrity of each and every country that is represented here. And not just the political independence of Ukraine, but the independence of all of us self-governing nations who are represented here. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Canada. And now I give the floor to the